Our patient initially presents with darker centrals and laterals. She wasn't happy with the color or the gingival recession around these teeth. As we can see, her natural canines were an O2O shade. Centrals and laterals were much darker. Preparation shade was about an ND3 with conventional veneer preparation. Provisional restorations were made, and a stone model of these restorations was provided to the laboratory as a starting point for shape and form. A master model was created, and a Siltec matrix of the provisional models was placed over the master model, and then wax injection was used to transfer all the data from the provisionals to the master model. Here you see the initial result of the wax injection that has the incisal edge position and form. From there, we'll start tuning these by adding wax and carving and create a shape that we feel will be appropriate. I felt like the incisal edge shape was a little short there. I'll start with the midline, always getting the midline embrasure vertical, and then start controlling that transition from embrasure to facial surface and getting the mesial lobes set up in the right way to create the aesthetic result that we would like to see. We'll start working on surface morphology, and we'll start tucking in the distal here. Those teeth looked a little bit big to me initially, so I wanted to downsize those just a little bit. Detailed waxing and all of your surface texture is very, very important, especially with a monolithic lithium disilicate restoration. It's much easier to do this in wax than it is grinding on a relatively hard lithium disilicate material. Here I'm just refining lobe formation shapes, looking at the incisal silhouette and the midline embrasure. Again, narrowing the appearance of that distal lobe by creating a little bit more deflective surface, and then defining my fine surface anatomy. Creating the triangular depressions there. So here's a picture of the final wax up. From here we'll go ahead and sprue and invest in a traditional manner for pressed ceramics. Once we have everything invested, we'll go ahead and burn it out in the burnout oven. We'll use a fast burnout technique. Once the burnout's completed, we'll go ahead and put the desired ingot, in this case an opal 1 ingot, into the ring and put it in our Ivoclar pressing furnace. Once the pressing program is complete, we'll go ahead and devest the restorations, and we start grinding our sprues off. Here I'm using Brasseler's lithium disilicate and zirconia grinders. They cut very quickly. Now I'm using a Brasseler's 863 burr, and this is what I do most of my surface morphology with. Here I'm again working on that area between the teeth. Where that contact is positioned is most of what is important with our aesthetics. All the surface morphology that we're doing out here looks neat and we get excited about that. It's kind of fun, but really positioning that contact and controlling the light into that embrasure form is what really makes or breaks a case. Here I'm using another one of the medium grit Brasseler's lithium disilicate grinders to clean up the lingual area close to the margins. I don't worry about chipping with that. I can get right up against the margin. And again, I'm trying to tune the tooth to look individual and working with the relationship with the adjacent tooth. We'll start off our staining process by dampening the surface with a little bit of stain liquid. And one thing that's really important is to make sure that you have stain liquid underneath between the restoration of your composite dyes, because it makes a big difference in the amount of show through of underlying color, and that plays a very important role. Thickness here, 1.2 millimeters of opal 1, will have a lot different look than this other case that had 0.4 facial thickness. If we put the two side by side, we see the thicker restorations are much brighter than the thinner restorations. If we look at a shade tab, the thin restorations were BL4, the thicker restorations are more of a BL1 shade. Now we'll add a little bit of color gradient from gingival to incisal just by staining. And as we blend our stains for good color gradation, we'll go ahead and do that to all of the teeth. And then we'll come in with a little incisal blue for translucency simulation. Remember, the opal ingot already has a lot of translucency. So I'll just enhance that a little bit. I'll go ahead and apply my glaze layer after I've fired all my stains. It goes in the oven, comes back out. Now we're doing a glaze layer. And I'll apply a little bit of white halo effect with a white stain in the glaze. I don't do that when I'm staining. I want to keep it separate. Here's our final result of how the restorations look on the composite dies. And again on our solid model, again note the embrasure form in between the teeth and how that transfers to the mouth. Here we've matched the optical qualities of the natural tooth enamel fairly well without doing any layering at all, simply by picking the correct ingot. Again, in this case, this was an opal 1 in a fairly thick restoration.